In today's video, I will be highlighting 7 rivalries in a Game of Thrones that I believe will elevate your experience by giving you a tangible rival and goal to overcome in your next AGOT playthrough. While I would love to include the Blackfyre and Targaryen rivalry in this video, the Blackfyre bookmarks as of now are not included, and playing as the Blackfyres is a little more complicated than simply playing as some of these other houses. But without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to kick this off with probably the most well-known out of any of the house rivalries on this list, and that's the Blackwood-Bracken rivalry. Spanning back to the First Men, the Blackwood-Bracken feud supposedly began, so both houses claim, when the Blackwoods or Brackens usurped the other for control over the Tridents. Though none remember the specifics exactly, countless wars have broken out between the two in the millennia since. And despite dozens of marriages, alliances, and kingly decrees trying their best to keep these two from exchanging blows, and despite the fact that both houses are at this point pretty heavily related, nothing has availed this feud. Though most of the time the feud is fairly black and white, as George heavily favors House Blackwood over Bracken to the point of satire, there are still some great moments in its bloody history, such as during the Blackfyre rebellions, which we talked about a little bit ago. When the half-Bracken bastard of King Aegon IV, or Aegon the Unworthy, Aegor Bittersteel Rivers, assisted the Blackfyres in 3 separate civil wars against his half-Blackwood brother, Brynden Bloodraven Rivers. This is probably the most fleshed out feud on this list, and while I do recommend trying whichever one you think is best, I would honestly recommend trying out both of them and seeing things from their unique perspectives. There's also a feud mechanic built into the game between these two, which is also really cool, which I don't believe exists for some of the other ones on this list. Our next feud highlights 2 First Men houses in House Bolton and House Stark, who have long and bitter history, with the Starks once ruling the North as Kings of Winter from Winterfell, and the Boltons in their region as the Red Kings from the Dreadfort. The Boltons, famous for their love of flaying and torturing, as shown on their sigil, have actually burned Winterfell to the ground, well, not necessarily to the ground, but burned Winterfell on a few occasions long ago, and flayed more than their share of Stark lords, displaying them on the Dreadfort for all to see, or wearing their skin as cloaks, bloody reminders of their ferocity and their viciousness. Though the Starks finally defeated and subjugated the Boltons at the outset of the Andal invasion, the Boltons have periodically risen up in rebellion, and although the Starks have forbidden it, it is rumored that the Boltons still practice the art of flaying their enemies in the dark dungeons of their sinister Dreadfort. Obviously, this rivalry comes to a head once again during the War of the Five Kings, when the Boltons betrayed the Starks at the Red Wedding, which isn't in the mod just yet, but it is something that does happen in the lore. Even without that, though, there's a ton of ancient bad blood between these two houses, which makes for some interesting headcanon and motivation for whichever side you pick. Although if you happen to pick House Stark, it's unlikely they'd outright move against the Boltons, since they haven't already, unless provoked. Whereas as the Boltons, you have a little bit more wiggle room in a more lore-friendly sense to be dastardly and antagonistic, because it's just kind of the house you are. There's also that fun fan theory that Roose Bolton is secretly a skin-changing vampire, which is unfortunately not in the game, but doesn't stop you from being an intrigue-ridden psychopathic murder hobo. Honestly, I love playing evil characters, and the Starks are often presented a little too goody two-shoe for my taste, at least in the modern books, so I'd probably do the Boltons only for a change of pace in that regard. Our next rivalry is probably the biggest surviving rivalry in the Reach, and that's between the First Men House Florent and the Andal House of the Tyrells. The Florents were one of the many more powerful and ancient houses descended from the mythical King Garth Greenhand, which were overlooked by the Targaryens when they gave control of the Reach to the Tyrells, the former stewards under House Gardener, after the climactic Field of Fire battle, in which House Gardener was destroyed. House Florent, among others, bitterly insisted upon their legitimacy in the years following the rise of the Tyrells, but were denied the opportunity to speak further, most likely due to their assistance of the Gardeners in the initial Targaryen invasion. During the events of the books, House Florent first supports Renly Baratheon and later Stannis in the War of the Five Kings, with Tywin Lannister later revoking their lands and giving them to the Tyrells, further igniting the hatred between these houses. Honestly, I personally don't love the Tyrells either, as I agree they only got the position because they just gave Aegon the keys to the castle, literally, so they earned it by being a little sketchy, in my opinion. I'd much rather see somebody like the Florents or the Oakhearts, or hell, even the Tarleys in Highgarden. Again, same as the Boltons and Starks, the Tyrells would be less likely to attack the Florents unless provoked, whereas the Florents can be crafty like the fox on their sigil, and I see a lot of murder in Highgarden's future for those who decide to play as these sly peoples. Our fourth rivalry pits the Andal House Yronwood versus the Rhoynar House Martell, a feud which dates back centuries and continued even after Queen Nymeria, who was Queen of the Rhoynar and founded the Nymeria Martells, defeated the Yronwoods after years of brutal battle. The Yronwoods still call their leaders the Blood Royal and are deeply proud of their history as the strongest of Dorne's former petty kings, so really it's no wonder how you'd work this if you were to pick their side in this conflict. Truthfully, I don't have a side really as I would pick, because I find the Martells to be fairly competent leaders in comparison to most of Westeros, and I would be cautious about anyone who would want to usurp that power. But you could argue that the Martells only won because they bowed to the whims of unlawful invaders, those being the Royner, and used that combined might to wrongfully take the Yronwood's lands, kind of like what the Tyrells did, but with a little more bloodshed. I suppose the real answer is up to you. Much like the Starks and the Boltons or Florents and Tyrell rivalries, if you choose to play as the Martells, it's unlikely you do much against the Yronwoods unless provoked, whereas if you play as the Yronwoods, you do have a little bit more wiggle room. Personally, I think playing as the Yronwoods would be more interesting as you can collect a pretty big swath of land before you move on Sunspear. Anyone who knows me knows that I love the Dunk and Egg novels, and I really enjoy this rivalry as it is presented in the first of those novellas, The Hedge Knight, which pits Dunk in a trial by 7 where originally a Red Apple Fossoway agreed to fight by his side only to betray him at the last minute in search of a lordship, where his younger cousin, who had been much bullied and much picked on by his older cousin, decides that he will take up his shield in honor of Sir Dunk and paints it green, saying famously, better to be green than wormy like his cousin. The two do fight in the trial, and although neither of them die, they do eventually split off with the Tyrells fully supporting the Green Apple Fossoways and the Red Apple Fossoways still controlling the duchy in which they live. Interestingly though, the Green Apple Fossoways are actually married to the Tyrells, being married to one of Mace's siblings. So that is an interesting play here. I think, honestly though, I don't think you'd have too much expansion ambitions, but as I've showed here on the channel in a one-off video, I do believe the Green Apple Fossoways should take their rightful place as rulers of Cider Hall. I know some of y'all are going to take this as a joke, but I mean this with full earnest when I say this is the Iron Islands versus everyone. Home of the proud seafaring people known as Ironmen or Ironboard, the Iron Islands are home to storms, rocks, pirates, and, well, iron. And they are the smallest and least populated of the Westerosi regions. The people of these wet and mostly inhospitable rocks worship the sea and a Cthulhu-like being known as the Drowned God. Ironborn's ruthlessness and greed is not viewed as a sin, but rather as a gift, and they value nothing higher than strength. They are known to take slaves for wives, or to be used as thralls, and command a considerable seafaring force, which has frequently, throughout the history of Westeros, been used against the people to bloody and costly effect. Basically, the Iron Islands hate everybody, so there's not really a specific house that I could give them a rivalry with. Maybe with the Starks, maybe with the Lannisters, as they've attacked them a lot. But really, there's a pretty much bad blood with anybody in the region for you to speculate your next move with. You can really start as any house. I recommend the Harlaws because I believe in tours and tournaments, anybody above a Duke cannot raid. So if you do want to do some jolly good raiding, you can do that as the Harlaws, or you can just take over the islands from the Greyjoys, or simply play as the Greyjoys and maybe try to retake some of the Riverlands as the Iron Islands used to control, or maybe finally take the North back from the Starks as they've attempted to do, and attempt to do during the War of the Five Kings when Euron claims independence of the Isles and the North for himself. Although I will say that if you're going to do this, please do it with the Shattered Kingdom, as you will get absolutely decimated if you try to do this with the Seven Kingdoms united. Okay, so House Forrester and House Whitehill are not canonical. I know. Well, I mean, the houses are canonical, but the rivalry is told through the Telltale game, and I'm not exactly sure if that's considered canon by George, but either way, Iron Will is in the game. House Forrester has the same sigil as the Telltale game, so clearly the devs were fans, so I'm going to roll with it. If you want to know who to play as, the Forresters are basically shown to be like a mini Stark family, whereas the Whitehills are kind of like the Boltons, if not worse, almost cartoonishly evil, and they assist them during the Red Wedding in the game, to the detriment of the Forresters. And although the story was left unfinished, the tragedy of House Forrester should probably be enough for people to sympathize with their cause to eradicate their rivals. Or if you like a little bit more of an evil house, kind of like the Boltons, if you enjoy being a maniacal little murder hobo, you can side with the Whitehills and paint the Ironwood Forest red with the blood of dead Forresters. Really, the choice is yours, but I wanted to include this one in here because, one, I thought somebody would probably mention it, and two, because the game was pretty good. I enjoyed the story of it, and I felt that people have kind of forgotten it over the years, so why not include it here? But that is going to be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching this little AGOT video. I know you guys like when I put these together, and I feel like they're really fun for me to make too. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you like the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube junk. New AGOT series usually comes to my channel once a month. I think right now we're working on the House Strong series. I'm not sure what we're going to do next, but hopefully the Blackfire bookmark is added soon so that we can give that a try. But until then, I'm Sol. This has been an AGOT video guide of some sort, and I will see you in the next one.